afternoon, all of you over there at the Maritime SheEO. This is Sofia and
Connor
from Fürstenberg Maritime Advisory, and we are very happy to be with you here this afternoon and morning for us to take you through a session on the pathways toward zero carbon and how you can prepare for systemic change. There is a green shift happening in shipping. Just over the last few years, we have seen a lot of attention to how shipping can become greener. But everything is happening at also great speed, and it's difficult for a lot of us to be at the forefront of what is happening. And also, what does the green shift actually mean? So this should be a familiar slide for most of you. Shipping is to decarbonize at least by 50% in total terms by 2050. And this is showing a graph of the targets, the visionary targets that the IMO set in April 2018. And it sets an absolute target of 50% reduction in 2050. And prior to that, a relative reduction of 40% by 2030, and a relative reduction of 70% in 2050. And we also know that last week at the MEPC were the first discussions to try and form this into regulations. And that path looks still to be quite long. Over the last few years, shipping has also noticeably starting to recognize their own role in helping the global economy and the environment overall to improve and to reduce the environmental burden. And we start to see shipping using the UN Sustainable Development Goals in their strategies. And here is an example from the Danish Ship Owners Association, Danish Shipping, of how they use some of the SDGs in their strategies. So they are focusing on goals number 8, 13, 14 and 16. They want to work actively to mitigate protectionism, enable trade and connect markets and people, generating overall growth and prosperity. They want to support the IMO CO2 reduction strategy and actively engage in the work on the regulatory requirements necessary to fulfill the reduction targets. They want to support initiatives that protect the oceans and maritime spatial planning to ensure human activities at sea take place in an efficient, safe and sustainable way. And they want to actively contribute to eliminating corruption and facilitation payments, which help enable fair trade and stronger institutions. This is just one example, but it really shows how we start to understand the role in the bigger scheme of things. So then if we look at a pathway towards zero, here is yet again an example. How do we believe that alternative fuels will become available globally going forward? Is it going to be like this, that we will have, in 2030, we will have 50-50 between ammonia and LNG perhaps, and an almost complete phase out of fossil fuels or contemporary fuels by 2050? Or is it maybe something like this, that we will have much more synthetic methanol coming on stream and much more sustainable biogas coming on stream than we foresee right now? There are many scenarios being developed out there, and we have no way of knowing what that's going to look like right now. And also, what fuels are going to be available for your trade and your ships? Here is an intensity map of the long distance ocean going trade in the world. And for those kinds of ships and for those trades, you cannot use very fuels that have what is called a low gravimetric density. So for instance, at the bottom of this graph on the right hand side here, you have the lithium ion, which is excellent for short sea and coastal shipping on batteries. But it doesn't make sense to use something like that on the big ships because the size and the cost is not going to be feasible at all. And then, of course, we have the new magic coming on stream, the so-called power to X, where we use renewable energy from wind and solar over electrolysis and producing all these new fuels, green ammonia, green hydrogen, green methanol, etc., etc. And this is starting to happen on pilot scale, and it holds a lot of opportunity to decarbonize all of our industries, but it's not an easy task. And as we have chosen to show you here as well, shipping is not the only industry which is looking for these solutions. So there will naturally be a competition about these solutions. And also, regarding the green shift, we start to see a growing insight of the opportunity of the circular economy in shipping. How you can reuse and recycle and engage in a circular supply chain, use the sharing economy, extend the product life of certain things and explore circular business models. But so that was an introduction to what this green shift is holding for us. And on those words, I will turn to you, Connor, to continue this conversation. But before that, I see that I have one more slide to show you here. To pull that all together, we want to say that the map for decarbonization is yet to be drawn. With all these activities happening around us, we will continue to have uncertainties, and we will continue to have difficulties to make risk-balanced decisions because the answers are just not there. And in order to progress on this, we need to take a systems perspective. We need to understand how all of it fits together, not only for the shipping industry, but as Connor is going to show you shortly, it hangs together with a much wider picture. So on that note, and I will leave you to it there.
So what is a systems level perspective? Let's have a look at that for a few minutes. So looking here at an overview, for example, for for ammonia, this is just a mapping exercise, quite arbitrarily done, which takes it from three perspectives. On the left, the ship, the fuel, and the finance side, and then we've created a value chain all the way from the green electron, where we're getting power from renewables, and in this situation producing hydrogen to produce ammonia. It goes into a storage and bunker infrastructure. Some of it may be carried as a cargo, and so it's going as cargo or powering machinery on board, and then some of it is going to be transported in where it's being carried as a cargo to make ammonia related products such as fertilizer and some chemicals. And the point of this slide here is just to try and illustrate just how many stakeholders there are actually involved in a value chain. And what's happening increasingly with the new fuels is that whereas before you had the oil industry producing the fuel for the shipping industry with a relatively clear and direct pathway, suddenly now we're looking at fuels which have involvement and the stakeholders have effect on each other, perhaps in ways that had never happened before and that are not intuitive to us because we're not used to thinking about it in this way. So when you're looking, for instance, on the right hand side, we have a little beaker there with bubbles coming out of it. What is the purity of the ammonia fuel and how will it affect the engine on the right? And then over on the left, we have between ammonia and hydrogen greening the operations in the Baltic North Sea could spill over to other industries. And then you start to think about this, just really off the top of my head, you start to think about the certification of fuels, what kind of ammonia is going to be suitable for engines. Do we know that yet? But if you don't think systemically here and you don't think about the entire value chain and the effects the stakeholders at one end may have on the other, you're going to lose the thread and you're going to lose the full picture. Moving on then to the uncertainties involved in this systemic thinking. So we just have a few, as we say here, an illustrative example. What will happen to the cost of the gap in cost between the new builds, between a conventional vessel and a vessel for one of these new fuels? We have no idea how that curve is going to develop. What about carbon price, which has got to do with market-based measures and regulation, which may be global, regional, national? We're hearing a lot in the media, right? What's going to happen to the carbon price per ton? We don't know. And then these regulatory events, when are they going to hit in? We've given an example here, the EU the trading system, regional IMO, when, where, how, we don't know. And the alternative fuel prices, how are they going to develop? It's going to be about demand, and it's going to be about supply, and it's going to be about regions of the world where they start popping up. They're not the same places where the oil is produced now necessarily. Maybe they will be in some cases, maybe not. Huge uncertainty looking ahead. But the thing is, and as I was saying, we're going to have to really think about this systemic approach and how collaboration is essential to make this work. Because this is not the old model. These are new fuels. The complexity is not just about there being a number of different fuels. It's about them all having their own characteristics and their own potentially different supply chains. So what does this mean for you? What does it mean for a ship owner or operator, all of us stakeholders in the industry?
Should I
go ahead?
Move on? Okay, yes. So when you try and look at this strategically, this is where I should turn the page. Decarbonization is not only a challenge, it is an opportunity, a strategic opportunity, if you are able to look at it in that way. Here is a schematic model of putting decarbonization into that strategic mindset. So the strategic challenge we have is that you have high complexity, you have high uncertainty, and not least, you have very high costs. A recent study that the Energy Transition Commission released just a few weeks ago suggests that in the overall picture of the development of alternative fuels, 80 to 90% of the capex is happening on land. It's the infrastructure on land that is the major cost here. So you as a ship owner have a very limited power here to change anything. And you then need to look at what are the strategic questions that I can try and answer here. So that could be about timing. When do I make a decision? What kind of decision am I making? How am I doing it? And not least, together with whom? And what are the aspects that are important to focus on here? What is related to technology? What about the partners? what about where we are doing this, the location and the timing. We just showed these different graphs Connor showed about, we don't know when certain things are going to happen, but how can we assess this in a strategic way? And also, where is the finance coming from? And we have a very classic chicken and egg situation where the upstream actors, those that will be producing these fuel, and who have the biggest capital costs and the biggest risks, they are looking for demand. And you as a ship owner, you are looking to perhaps build your new ship that can operate on this new fuel that doesn't really exist yet. So who is going to finance your ship? So it's a very challenging situation. But so when you try and then find answers to these strategic questions, you have you need to look at what are the insights that we have. We don't know how regulations are developing. I call it a regulatory stalemate here. You have significant barriers to scale because of these chicken and egg situations, and that the costs upstream are really the big ones. And we think that there will be a carbon tax, but how big is that going to be, and how is it going to help you? Knowing, of course, that the carbon tax is not going to differentiate, perhaps, between the different low carbon fuels. And how to work with technologies that are kind of first of a kind and not yet mature and therefore have higher risk levels. So creating that big picture, you then need to look at those relevant external factors and bring that into your internal drivers. Who are you? Where do you want to be? How can you navigate through this? And look at, should you be a first mover, or should you be a fast follower? Where are you in this game? And how can you move around in this space? So your starting point is there to understand what your status is. You need to know, kind of create that picture of what have you done so far? What are you planning to do next? What are the roadblocks that you have identified so far that you need to find ways to get over? But then also, where do you want to be? What is the gap that you would like to pass? Because you need to be able to move and not just see this giant mountain ahead of you. That's not really going to take you anywhere. So you need to be able to define the kind of sizable bits that you can start acting on. And when you do that, you also need to bring in all these macro perspectives. And here is a great mix of a lot of things. Just an example, but certainly we put Greta Thunberg there on the top left corner, who has impacted the mindset of and many with her.
Consumers.
And consumer mindsets. And we have innovations happening at great speed with regards to how we produce food. We have new energy solutions. Here we have an example of floating wave power. We have energy islands, we have floating solar, we have algae factories, and we have raising sea levels, we have ocean plastics, we have mad weather, we have piracy. These are just examples of things that may impact your strategic path, and you just need to be aware of this as you move forward. And when you have created all that into something you can look at, then you need to develop scenarios. If scenario planning was like weather forecasting, you would understand that you will always have errors in what that weather is going to look like. Perhaps the forecast says sun, and then you go out there and it's raining nevertheless. So you brought an umbrella along. So this is the same kind of approach you need to have in this case as well. You need to be prepared for different scenarios. So now I'm leaving it to you, Connor, to take them through how to go about this work themselves.
Okay. So when we look at this, one way of kind of looking at pathways and methodology for this is doing things like defining mutual goals, as we state here. It's very clear to us that new ways of collaborating across the value chain are going to be essential in finding business models that may allow the start and indeed the scaling of this transition. So it's a question of everybody understanding that everything has to move forward together. The global, as Sofia was saying, the global investment is mainly going to be ashore, and it's going to have to tie in inexorably with the energy transition in all other industry. So this, again, going back to the systemic thinking, we have to start thinking this way, and we have to start thinking about these connections. By doing this, then we will find ways to connect the business models together and reduce risk across the whole planning and execution of this. And these new business models are going to be essential. It's a business innovation. It's this new way of thinking about what the future is going to look like. We used to just look at the bunker prices, try and predict the variances, hedge against this, look at the way trade is going, look at the macro inputs have been fairly standardized for a long time, but this has now changed. So we also have to identify key enablers. So here's an example of four very obvious ones. The technology, it needs to be safe, it needs to be commercially feasible and scalable. There's no point in doing a one-off project that you'll never be able to push forward at scale. From the regulation side, which is tied to the policy side on the right, we have the enforcement needs to be reliable, and it needs to be fact-based. The regulation, which is part of the problem with developing regulation. It needs to be very solidly fact-based. And when it comes to the policy that's feeding into that regulation, the playing field has to be level, and the incentives, and there needs to be a value add aspect to it. It's not just policy for policy's sake. And then those two should feed into, and those three should feed into the finance for the sharing of risk and rewards, bankability and asset flexibility. Asset flexibility being very important for the longevity and the avoiding stranded assets. So then, if we find synergies across the value chain, what does that provide for us? Well, it gives us visibility up and downstream of the value for, as we said earlier, from the green electron right down to the consumption of ammonia, whether it's as a ship fuel or as a fertilizer product, or the same can be said for methanol or any of the new fuels. This will reduce the financial risk, as we've touched on before, enable scaling, and very importantly, set green standards where the real environmental footprint is understood, recognized, monitored, and properly executed through the whole value chain. And the whole thing, in theory, should start to bring down the cost as scale comes up. So there's various different ways of producing scenarios. We could look at, for instance, try to establish a return on investment for the various scenarios. Look at which scenario pathway, how it does, what it might look like for you, and you can use, here we have like a generic three metrics in each scenario to try and establish what the return on investment might be. And of course, return on investment is considered a financial element, but if you don't properly put in, as we mentioned before, put in the real green pathways, you may find that if you don't look at the sustainability return on investment in a half a decade or a decade down the line, what you've started doing no longer becomes relevant in this for the decarbonisation. So you have to be very careful that you really are getting a return on investment in terms of sustainability as well as the finance side, and that's a very big mind shift, a shift in thinking about this issue. That brings us to a close, maybe a little early, which is good.
Yeah.
If there's anything else you'd like to...
Maybe we can, I have just put a note on the video wall that we are happy to take any questions as well. And while this is a new media for us to use, maybe we should also see if we can develop some of the thinking we touched upon here. What have been the biggest insights, Connor, you have seen engaging with the value chain, stakeholders across the value chain on the quest for decarbonisation? What has surprised you on this journey?
Well, I think what we're seeing there's a huge amount of reports being released, and various fuels being analysed, and there's a lot of meaty information coming out. But what I feel is that the technology providers, the vendors, the designers, they are working away on the future. That seems to be quite clear. They're working away, and there's new combinations. There's BP and Ørsted are, for instance, and I know, talking systemically again, BP and Ørsted have just announced that they're doing a project to use wind to power a refinery. So this is the kind of thinking that's going on, and this is going ahead. The technology is being applied in new ways, and there's new engines being developed, and there's thoughts about how the new infrastructure is going to look. But the problem we have still is business model. This is still the big problem. How are we going to finance this? It's such an enormous transition to make.
Yeah. What does the bank typically say about this? We have been engaging with a couple of banks looking at how they can finance first movers on this journey. And what have the learnings been there?
That they have a risk problem. It's just outlandishly outside their normal way of evaluating risk. They can't evaluate it. So it's totally understandable. It's fair enough. So we keep hearing, what we keep hearing is we're going to have to see a carbon tax. We're going to have to see something that starts to level the price here, the fuel prices. And we had Trafigura coming out with an announcement that they, generically would be prepared to pay quite a lot per ton.
$300 per ton.
$300 per ton. We have the sea cargo
charter.
Sea cargo charter. Yeah, coming out. So that's very interesting to see the drivers starting to appear from downstream.
Yes.
That's very interesting as well. Is it there's starting to be signs of suction downstream. The charters and eventually we hope largely the consumers are going to start demanding a cleaner supply chain.